Hello audience. In this video I'm going to show you how I rebuilt the Classic. Now you may remember this car from the Ecotech engine overhaul video series, but if you don't, here's the story. I went through the engine on this, got it running really good, and then about 3 days later it got rear-ended really hard. Then sat around here for a few months till I decided what to do with it. Then I decided to fix it, and in this video I'm going to show you specifically what I did. Now, I didn't take that many pictures or videos when I was doing this, reason being I had no experience with collision repair, and I wasn't all that sure I would get it done. But I'll show you what few pictures I did take. Now, I'd like to point out first of all that this is not an instruction video on how to properly repair collision damage. This is just how I hastily and with a low budget patched this thing back together to get a few more years out of it. So if you're watching this thinking, that's the wrong way to do it, or you're doing this wrong, well, you're probably right. Anyway, let's get started. Now specifically what was wrong with it was the right frame rail was bent down right behind the rear suspension. The right shock tower was pushed forward a little bit, and the left frame rail was bent down slightly, which was twisting the quarter panel and forcing it in. Pretty much from the rear window forward, there was nothing else wrong with the car. So I got out the plasma cutter, a hacksaw, the tin snips, and I started cutting away everything damaged beyond repair to see what was left. After doing all that, it looks surprisingly a lot better than it did before. Even though the shock tower was pushed forward, the car was still sitting level and it was still tracking straight ahead, so functionally there wasn't really anything wrong with it. I tried straightening the shock tower with hand tools, but the body's pretty strong, it really couldn't be moved. You really need a proper frame rack to really reverse that kind of damage. But since it was working properly, I just chose to leave it alone. At this point, I decided I was going to save it, so I went to the junkyard and got a quarter panel, a trunk lid, a bumper reinforcement, and all that stuff off another car. Now normally with constructing or reconstructing a car body, it's normal to start with the internal structure and work your way out. But since the structure was either bent or missing, I decided to do it the opposite. Align the outside panels where they look good, and then build the structure around that. I started by installing the replacement trunk lid and aligning it so the gap between it and the rear window was even, and that it sat parallel with the roof, and that it was centered from side to side. Next, I straightened the left quarter panel so it matched the trunk lid. So here's the left frame rail, or whatever you call it on a unibody. Anyway, it was buckled right here, and it was pushed down. So I cut it open right there, and put a jack under the back of it, and as I was jacking it up, the quarter panel went right back up where it should be. So I jacked it up a little further than that, and then while it was holding there, I welded these plates over it, and then let it go, and it sprung back a little, and it ended up right about where I wanted it. And then it was time to install the replacement quarter panel and back panel. Now, obviously at first I attached it with clamps, making sure it fit pretty well, adjusting it so it fit the trunk lid, and kind of matched up with the left side panel. And I started welding it on a little bit here and there, while constantly standing back, looking at it, making sure it didn't move, or making sure I didn't overlook something. Eventually, I was confident that I got it right, and then I welded it on completely for good. I'd like to point out that when aligning body panels like this, it's really important that the car is sitting on level ground, and that it's on the proper wheels, and that all the wheels and tires match, and they're all properly inflated. Or if it's on jack stands, that all the stands match, that they're the same height. because if the car's sitting even the least bit crooked, that can make a huge difference. And now it was time to restructure the inside. Now I made a new frame rail out of, I think, 16th inch steel. Whatever thickness the original was, I matched that. And I don't have the tools to bend anything that size, so I cut it in 3 pieces and welded it together as a channel. Now, if you're wondering why I didn't just take all this off a car at the junkyard, it's because anything you get out of the junkyard, I gotta pay their prices for. I discovered it was cheaper to just make all this myself out of raw materials. I'd also like to point out that I cut the exhaust mount off the old frame rail and welded it to the new one. The final step was to replace the trunk floor. Now, as you can see over here on the left side, that's some of the original floor left. Still got a lot of damage to it, which I didn't bother to fix. And I got some scrap 20 gauge sheet metal and just cut it to size and started welding it in. And got some cheap sealer at Home Depot to put over the welds. Doesn't look very pretty, but it is functional. Already started rusting over because I coated it with absolutely nothing. Now, this part of the wheel well is off the original car. Since the tower was moved forward, I detached it and welded it onto here, which this is all part of the replacement quarter panel, and then made a patch panel to go between them. Now, yes, this looks really bad, really sloppy, but functionally, it's pretty much as strong as it was when it was new, and visually, once you put the trunk mat over all this, you can't see any of it anyway. So, it's good enough for me. After all that, all I had to do was bolt the bumper reinforcement on, put the bumper on, put the taillights on, and that's it. It was done. I painted over the welds on the outside, and it was finished. I drove it around that way in multiple shades of faded paint and gray primer. I really wanted to get the whole car repainted after that, because beside the collision damage, all the panels that were not damaged, they still had door dings, scratches, and the clear coat was coming off the hood, and the whole thing just really looked tacky. I really wanted to get the whole thing repainted. I was thinking about using the color off a newer Chevy Malibu to kind of update the whole thing, make it look a little newer, but no matter what color I choose, that would require spending money on paint and using up favors with the painter. And while all this was going on, I still wanted to get the Falcon painted at the time, so that was kind of higher up on the priority list. So I just left it as is for several months. After a few months went by, the guy who does painting for me, he just got done painting a 1990-something Chrysler and painting it gold, and the base coat ended up covering a whole lot better than he thought, and he ended up with a lot of it left over. So he told me, if you want to paint it this color, you don't have to pay for base coat. And granted, I wasn't too crazy about gold at first. That was probably like my last choice, but I knew that no matter what color we painted it, all the panels would match, all the paint would look like new, and it would make the whole car look new. And I knew I'd be satisfied with that, so we went with that anyway. And boy, was I right. This whole car looks brand new, and I am definitely very pleased with it. So that's about it for this project. There's not really anything else to say. I've been pretty much driving this car every day since the repair, and it's up to, I think, 263,000 miles now. I've had no problems whatsoever with the engine, no problems with the collision damage, no long-term effects or anything like that. Runs and drives like a brand new car. So, thank you very much for watching. Like, dislike, comment, subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. While I was at the junkyard looking for parts, I found this mint factory option rear spoiler off a 2000 Malibu LS. These are pretty difficult to find, especially with the brake light intact, so when I saw this one, naturally I grabbed it. What's really neat about this is you can see it through the rear view mirror, so whenever you look behind you, the whole car just feels a bit more sporty.